back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda, and this time, I'm gonna let Jackson say some Japanese stuff. Never mind, he's not gonna say anything. I guess we're just gonna move past that. It's a single-person episode. See, I was trying to throw you a bone this time, because last time when we were talking about Parasite, I cut you off. This time I'm like, go ahead.
I wasn't prepared for it. I was legit like shook. I'm like, oh, now the spotlight's on me. I was I was deciding whether to say actual Japanese or do the Ken-sama meme, but I think the Ken-sama meme might be too obscure at this point, so I would just sound like a fucking idiot.
I mean, you might just sound like a fucking idiot anyway. You're on this podcast,
right,
where idiocy goes to die.
Right. I mean, like, I'm doing weeaboo shit. I'm gonna sound like an idiot no matter what, but I'd be an incorrect idiot, and I don't want people to think that.
So, being a fool is one thing. Being wrong is another thing. All right.
True.
All right, so we're here this week. We're going to be talking about 1988's Akira. It is a anime film that is considered like the anime film in the United States. If you heard of an anime film, it's probably Akira, to be perfectly honest. It is literally everywhere, including, as I found out while we were talking in a pre-discussion, I was doing a little bit of research as we were discussing things. It is pretty much the entirety of Kanye West's Stronger video.
Is that true?
Just shot for shot. Yes, no, entirely. Although he puts himself in the role of Tetsuo, which makes me think he might not understand the movie super well.
That's actually perfect, though.
It is. But also, Kanye, you sure about that one, bud?
Kanye, I'm sure about that.
Well, if you're unfamiliar with it, it is one of the bases of like modern cyberpunk in a lot of ways. It's got some gross body horror to it, some cool Mad Max road races, some fascism, some end of the world. So I mean, it's your fucking horrors divorce of anime movies. There was charcuterie board, I think, might be what I was going for there. I don't really know. I also am willing to bet that I pronounced that just so wrong.
You absolutely did. Hey, at least we know that Sean reads. He didn't just get that word from a YouTube video. He had to read it somewhere to pronounce it so wrong.
That is the one thing that I have. Like, I talked with my sister about this because her and I both fuck up words constantly. And the reason is because we spent our youths reading and almost exclusively reading. So we have like, oh, I've seen this word before. It sounds like this. And then we say it and everyone's like, what the fuck did you just say to me? And I'm like, oh, whores divorce. And they're like, what? And then I die of embarrassment and call into a hole because I was wrong. And if there's one thing that's worse than looking a fool, it's being wrong.
True. Oh man. This is Akira, not Akira Toriyama, the author of Dragon Ball, just Akira, no relation.
You really just wanted to get that in there, didn't you?
I couldn't think of a real joke, so I just said it.
Well, before we get into the movie, the meat of the movie, the crux of the movie, our thoughts on the movie, if it's okay with you, need to go on a tear for a minute.
Go for it, fam. Go for it.
If you put your movie exclusively on Hooooo and or Tubi, with the only way to watch it being with ads throughout it and not any other way to purchase it, you are actively encouraging piracy. I'm just gonna say that right here, right now. I did, for what it's worth, find out that if you get a trial to Funimation, you can watch it on Funimation legally. But let me tell you, there was definitely some thoughts of like, what was that old website that let me watch movies? Because I will not sit through a 2-hour movie with ads when I am streaming it. Like, listen, if I turn on the TV and I'm like, oh, and this is something I've done, Cabin in the Woods is on, I'm gonna just sit down and watch it. And like slowly I watch the whole movie, even with ads, just because I'm like, I got nothing else going on. I don't feel like finding on a streaming service, whatever. It's fine. That's one thing. That's perfectly acceptable.
That's the devil's bargain when you turn on the boob tube and just sit there and like let what the channels decide. That's the deal.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that deal. But when I am hunting for a movie, especially a prestige movie like fucking Akira, and you're like, yeah, here it is. You can watch it on this service that you pay for, but you have to watch it with ads every 5, 10, 20 minutes, whatever. Fuck off. Fuck you. And that's how you get pirates. Do you want pirates? Because that's how you get them. You fucking buffoons. I was really mad last night, is really what this all boils down to. I was very salty at how hard it was for me to find and watch Akira. Why? I genuinely, you cannot rent this movie on Amazon, on Google, on YouTube, which is technically just Google. I know, don't at me. There are any number of places that I would have been like, yes, I went into this prepared to spend $3 to $5 on this movie to rent it. And I saw it on Hulu. I'm like, great, I don't have to spend the money to do so because I'm already paying for this service. And then, no, you can't rent it anywhere. What the fuck, Akira? What the fuck? That's my rant. I'm sorry. I just need to get that off my chest.
Yeah, Disney, eat my ass.
I thought I had a minute to take a drink of water, and I did not.
Yeah, I just got like a minute-long ad at the start of the movie, and that was it. Which I'm fine with that. I mean, it's
yeah, I'd be okay with that too. Honestly, if you're like, watch this ad and watch the rest of the movie, great. But I knew there were more ads because when I paused it, I could see that there were ad breaks marked in the timeline.
Big F over here, folks.
So mad. So fucking mad. Jackson, what'd you think of Akira?
So this is my second time watching Akira, actually. It is yours as well, I believe.
Indeed.
I actually know because we talked about this during the pre-discussion, but, you know, I got to keep up
Jackson,
with
you don't, you shouldn't, you didn't have to mention that. We could have just played it off and kept walking with it.
You know, I'd rather look like a fool than be wrong.
This has nothing to do with Akira, by the way. That is not like a theme in Akira. That is just the theme of the episode.
That's a theme for our lives. But so what did I think about Akira? Well, the first time I watched Akira, it was a year ago, 2 years ago, somewhere along those lines. I liked it. I did not like grow up with this movie. It was not a formative anime experience for me. Indeed, I sought it out because it is considered a classic like Ghost in the Shell. Ghost in the Shell is a better movie, by the way.
I am curious to watch it, actually. Sam and I watched it with Sam, and we were talking a little bit about it. And like, I'd be very curious to watch Ghost in the Shell. You're talking about the Scarlett Johansson one, I assume?
Oh, yeah, the best movie of all time. Actually,
yeah.
I mentioned this before about Ghost in the Shell. I had not seen that movie for the longest time either, but a friend of mine was like, oh my God, like, I'm actually kind of curious about the ScarJo movie. You've never seen the original? Like, let's do a double feature. Let's watch it. Let's rent the original, and then let's go see the ScarJo movie. And so seeing them back to back was just the primo experience, because I watched this like genuinely incredible like sci-fi like cyberpunk existentialist film, and then I go and see the fucking like Hollywood like tripe in all its glory, all of its stupid glory. But we're not here to talk about Ghost in the Shell. We're here to talk about Akira. And I liked it the first time that I watched it. I didn't love it. Mostly I liked it for the visuals. And as far as the story goes, I think part of it is what I call the Matrix effect, because I had not seen The Matrix for a long time until a friend demanded that I sit down and watch it with him, at which point, by the time I finally saw it, its ideas and what made it so groundbreaking back when it first came out had been kind of picked clean, and so I was like, yeah, it's okay, it's pretty good.
I mean, this is the progenitor to the Matrix.
No, exactly. And so there was a little bit of that, like especially when it came to the story, like it's the story is not going to blow you away unless you're a very particular type of person, which we will talk about. But the animation's still great. Like, stylistically, it's wonderful. There's lots of great action, lots of well-directed action, unique style, just really well done animation in general. And so for that, I quite enjoyed it. Watching it again, I appreciated it more. And I don't know if that's just because it was my second viewing, so I was more attuned to like themes and allegory and that stuff, because basically my problem with the first viewing, my first viewing was the characters. Not that they're like terrible characters, not that I thought the story was bad, but I'm like, I mean, you've seen this dynamic a lot since, you can tell what's been inspired by this, and it's not exactly the most like unique dynamic to begin with between Kaneda and Tetsuo to begin with. So that was sort of my issue. So now that I was watching less for the characters and more for like cultural commentary and just the fact that I am indeed the biggest, most disgusting fucking weeaboo who is about to move to Japan, and therefore knows a thing or two about Japanese history or Japanese culture.
That thing or two is, of course, history of Japan, but you know.
I mean, I took a like college class about the history of Japan.
Right. But it does boil down to just History of Japan by Bill Wirtz.
I mean, you're not wrong. You know, in that regard, you know, not that I am by any means an expert on Japanese history or Japanese culture. I will say at this point, I'm probably slightly more knowledgeable about it than your average person, which is
more knowledgeable about it than me. So
I mean, I got that going for me. I'm more of a disgusting fucking weeaboo than Sean. Great, what a thing to put on my resume.
It's not hard to do, to be perfectly honest.
But with that in mind, I enjoyed the movie a lot more, and in fact, I thought it was interesting. I'm like, this is probably like really resonant, like kind of a gut punch on an emotional level, like to a Japanese person, particularly a Japanese person, like when this would have came out and that particular zeitgeist of like the economic boom before the bubble burst and all that stuff. But it wasn't really popular in Japan. This is another Speed Racer scenario where it kind of bombed in Japan and then did really, really well in the West, but not because it really resonated with America thematically. It's very Japanese thematically.
Oh yeah.
Not to say that there aren't things that like you can identify with. We're all human beings after all, but it's very much like, I don't know if we've watched an anime this rooted in like Japanese culture since like The Wind Rises. like probably like we're talking that level here, where it's not like just, oh, you know, My Hero Academia is about superheroes. Anyone can get behind that.
I might honestly argue that The Wind Rises is less rooted in Japanese culture than this, because like The Wind Rises has a lot of like about artistry to it, and like that is something that applies to almost everyone, whereas this is just like entirely like looking down the face of Japanese fascism and ideologies that, I mean, is hard to understand if you're not in that mindset, which I am not, and I'll talk about as soon as Jackson's done here.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I agree. Yeah, but like, it's just so interesting to me that like this really rich movie full of like themes and symbolism, like it didn't really land with the audience that would appreciate the themes and symbolism. I think it's more appreciated now, like after it became financially successful, and I think
Tetsuo go boom.
But yeah, that was the American reaction. Like it was all about like, dude, like look at how fucking gnarly this movie is. Like, you know, people get shot and gunned down in the street, which is fine. Like, you know, that has its own place too. But I just think it's really funny that like, yeah, Tetsuo go boom is what it's famous for. I mean, you're completely right. Is the thing.
Oh boy. Yeah, am I gonna take over for a minute?
Yeah, I did my spiel. Go for it.
Great. Well, this is also, as Jackson said, my second time watching this movie, and I have a very similar experience to Jackson. That the first time I watched it, I walked away from it. And I even texted him like, "Yeah, Akira is good, but it's a lot of like sounds and visuals that are all really interesting, and I think you're like, oh, interesting, and like kind of move past it. I'm like, oh god, did I miss something? I remember this vividly.
Yeah.
But then, watching it a second time, I say this almost every episode, I was an idiot when it comes to film literacy and media literacy in general, but I've gotten better at it. And watching it a second time, I was, much like Jackson, more looking at like symbolism and cultural ideology rather than the, character development and other such visuals this time. So I was more focused on that and came away with some different themes than what Jackson came away with, but none that are like as crazy in depth as his, I would argue, just because I, again, know nothing about Japan other than the Bill Wirtz video. But I think I liked it more. I genuinely don't know. I think my biggest complaint with it is that it's a 2-hour movie, which isn't really that long given how many other movies that we've seen, but it felt longer than Seven Samurai, which is a 4.5-hour movie or 3.5-hour movie. One of those. It's a long movie.
Yep, I completely agree. That's true.
Akira is a long fucking movie, and there are a lot of elements to it that just kind of feel bloated, pun not intended, and just kind of messy. Also, pun not intended, given the Tetsuo of it all. We're just spoiling the end of Akira here, but it doesn't matter. Everyone knows what the end of Akira looks like.
I was gonna, as soon as you know what the broad strokes of Akira's plot is, you like, even if you don't know what the end of Akira is, you know what the end of Akira is.
Yeah, you've seen it on Twitter at some point, guaranteed. And I would say it's not even necessarily like the part of the movie that is the most interesting in general.
No.
So I'm not really worried about goofing about Tetsuo exploding. But
it is a gnarly explosion, though.
No, it is. There's some really good gore and body horror in there. But I do think in general, though, like it's a very long, bloated movie, and it has moments of like really interesting stuff interspersed with like just what feels like half an hour of nothingness happening. And like that half an hour, it's weird because I feel like it's very important to the movie that it happens, but it just can't help but feel so fucking boring, and I can't really even point to why. There's nothing about any part of the movie that theoretically should be boring, but there's just chunks of it where I'm just like, why does it feel like I've been watching this scene for 3 hours? And it's the other thing too is that like there's a craft to making a scene feel long and drawn out and uncomfortable, but it's also not that. Like that does not what the intent of the author is, at least from my reading of the film. It just doesn't end.
Yeah, I mean, because the movie's pretty high octane action a lot of the time, and I feel like it's the ends, like kind of the first half hour and the last half hour that maybe feel a little bit draggy, because once the movie gets going and shit starts going down and there's a lot more like popping off, like I think that part of the weirdness is that like the movie starts kind of slow, like establish the world, establish the characters, establish the physics, the energy, Akira himself, whatever. And
but
then
also that bike scene in the beginning fucking rules. I love that bike scene.
Yeah, no, like not to say there's not good stuff at the beginning, but there are more slow dialogue scenes, especially after that. And then in the middle we have like the general conflict, and like even this time when I was like, okay, great, yeah, we're almost to the end. Like I thought we were getting to the end, and then I paused to like go get a drink, and I'm like, oh, we still have half an hour.
I knew how this movie went, and I refused to pause it or even look at how much time was left because I knew I would be disappointed.
Yeah.
Like as it was going on, I'm just like, oh my god, I remember how much we have left, and it is a lot, and I am done. Thank you. Check, please.
No, and it's like I don't even think that last half hour is bad necessarily, but I think you're right in that like messy is a good word for it. There's just a lot of stuff going on, and part of that is adaptation. The manga, like
it's a lot longer.
Yeah, from what I understand, the movie adapts like one arc of the manga and like combines some other shit from the manga to make it a standalone story.
Like I keep seeing the box set for sale, and I'm like, that's like a 6-volume, 4-volume, something like that set of manga, and like the thick stuff too. I'm like, that's crazy that they got condensed down to like a 2-hour movie, and I wonder like what got pulled out of it, and I wonder if that might honestly, despite the fact that it would make the movie longer, make it feel shorter. Because here's actually my theory on why it feels long, and that is because you spend so much time trying to piece together what the fuck is happening that
it's got a lot
draining.
of that too.
Like there is a early reference to like this guy, there's somebody on the Supreme Executive Council who's playing both sides, and the first time I watched it, I never figured out who that was because like there's just so much else happening around it. Like there's so many characters and so many players and so many just scenes of things happening that like this time I actually figured out, I'm like, okay, wait, no, that's what's going on here. I kind of get a little bit more, but like I still don't know why this person was playing both sides. I have internal theories, but I don't think it's ever explicitly stated. And so you're just doing so much heavy mental lifting essentially for the movie that it's exhausting. Yeah. So I think that's my theory.
It is kind of an exhausting movie, which is why it's sort of a relief when shit starts getting gnarly, I think. That like, all right, like here we go. We're going to zoom around on bikes and like blow shit up. And, Tetsuo puts on his cape and that's awesome. And like, all right, here we go.
Gee, do you think you might have inspired Vegeta in some capacity?
Oh God, take your fucking pick on how many different villains Tetsuo inspired. Holy shit.
Oh my God, yeah, no, for sure, for fucking sure.
Because then Vegeta has his own like snowball like rolling down the hill amount of fucking copies. You have like Sasuke and like all that other shit. So.
It's a formative. It's a formative movie, and I think to cap off our pre-discussion, what I can say about it best is that I think Jackson would probably agree with me in what I'm about to say, and that if we saw this movie before we were in our 20s, like when we were 13, 14, 15, somewhere in that world, this would be like the fucking movie, like just so much our shit. Absolutely a formative experience, and I think that's why it resonates with so many people because they saw it when they were in that right age. Like that target zone where it's just like it rocks your fucking world. You're like, oh my God, animation can do this, the world can do this, movies can do this, oh my God, this is fucking sick as shit, let's go. Whereas we've seen so many other movies, properties, animes, matrices that are very similar in themes, ideology, stylings, that when we come back to, we're like, no, that was cool, I see it, I appreciate it, but it doesn't have the same impact and weight.
No, it definitely doesn't have that like guttural emotional impact. I appreciate a lot about it though, and I think that like basically if you've heard of Akira, it's probably worth watching. Like I'd say, but the more interested you are in like the history of animation or just like Japanese culture, like the more boxes that it ticks and the more like heavily invested in those boxes you are, the more you're going to get out of it. Because I think when you're not in, I absolutely agree with Sean, and that when you're not in the zeitgeist, it's hard to feel super invested on an emotional level and not on like an appreciation level, just because so many, the structure's a little messy, the characters are a little broad, and it's been picked clean as far as like story and character archetypes go.
Alternatively, if you can do it, turn off your brain and watch it, and I think you'll also have a good time.
Yes.
So there's your two options. Either be so fucking invested in the history of Japan and how it relates to Akira, or fucking turn off your brain and go, ha ha, Tetsuo, go boom.
No, that's a good point. I do think it's worth a recommendation on the animation alone. Like stylistically and in terms of action, this is genuinely incredible.
Also, the soundtrack is wonderful. Absolutely incredible. Haunting.
Yes.
So haunting, but really, really good for that regard. And actually makes me think a lot. I would not be surprised to find out that Ridiculon, the people who did the Binding of Isaac soundtrack, specifically Binding of Isaac Rebirth, had some influence from this movie's soundtrack because like that breathing takes a big role in the Cathedral soundtrack. I think the Cathedral, I might be fucking up, maybe Shoal. One of them has like that heavy like like breathing to it that just like is really guttural and terrifying. And like I guarantee they definitely took some influence from this. Anyway, we should get into spoilers, huh?
Let's do it to it. Ain't nothing to it but to do it.
Well, before we ain't nothing to it but to do it, we have to say, if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes, tell a friend, share the podcast around, all that good stuff. Support us on Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/BADH_cast. And next week, we talked a little bit about doing a Leica month. We have chosen to not do that in November, but we're still going to talk about at least one Leica movie, which is Kubo and the Two Strings, one of my all-time favorites. It's a fan-fucking-tastic movie, and Jackson has not watched it.
It's been on my backlog forever, so I'm excited.
Abso-fucking-lutely. For now, though, let's talk about Akira, shall we?
Let's talk about Akira. Where do we want to start, my boy?
I think if you don't mind me kind of kicking the ball off the starting podium, I don't know how sports work. I'm gonna
Nice.
I'm gonna take a stab at it with what is probably the most obvious theme of the movie, which is the atomic bomb.
Yeah, that's a good place to start as any. So.
Especially because I feel like it'll segue quite nicely into what you have to say.
Waiting in the wings with my giant fucking sermon as usual.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we can kind of pull back to my own set of things, which is where it kind of relates back to religion and spirituality, which is something that I've always found interesting, especially because a lot of my own, not necessarily beliefs, but like interests reflect in this movie. So let's start with the atomic bomb, which is to say that this movie is definitely a lot about anxiety around the atomic bomb, and more specifically, like, why do we keep chasing after it and it never goes well? I mean, it's a fairly short. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I'm probably gonna talk for like 3 minutes here at most because it's not an incredibly deep theme. But like with the opening shot is a bomb going off, potentially Akira. It's never totally clear, but it doesn't seem to be Akira. Very reminiscent of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So like you already Japan is the country that knows about atomic devastation.
Everyone else, every other country in the world, they're like, ever since the Cold War ended, we're like, we don't give a fuck about nukes anymore. But Japan's like, oh, we still very much give a fuck about nukes. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Japan has some trauma scars, shall we say. And like, it's very clear in this movie, as I said, the opening shots are one akin to an atomic bomb, if not actually an atomic bomb. And then from there, it's a lot of conversation with scientists and military people, not really unlike Dr. Strangelove, honestly, kind of in that vein.
Yeah, there's some parallels. Yeah, I agree.
Of like, I'm a scientist. I want to see what happens if we keep pushing this and like, you know, put these two halves together or, you know, split them apart in the ways of the atom, hence the atomic bomb. It's like mirror and whatnot. I don't know enough about science, but I guarantee like they're definitely doing some atomic bomb shit in here. That said, though, you know, scientists just want to see what happens. They want to keep pushing it. And the military is like, this is a death toll and we shouldn't do this. Which I don't know how reflective that is necessarily of the actual military. I feel like in my experience that tends to be inverted a little bit, but
like kind of like Strangelove, what wasn't it also like the colonel, like he was pretty interested in like going along with the scientists, not to the same degree, but like he wanted to control the power because it was mostly the like politicians that were like fuck you and this Akira shit, like you know, like I feel like there's still that similar kind of split there.
Yeah, no, I mean I think you're right. I think that I genuinely, and we're going to get into this a lot with what Jackson's about to say, I think that there is a lot of a cultural gap between my understanding of like what I'm watching it, because I think what it boils down to for me is like I definitely picked up the atomic bomb anxieties, but like I didn't necessarily see what they were saying in the same way. Like I feel like it exuded the anxiety, which is important to get what the point across. But I'm like, what exactly are we saying here other than let's not fuck around with the atomic bomb? The atomic bomb is bad. Which, yes.
Yeah, and that's definitely something to keep in mind, like when thinking about these movies, and that, like, you know, that's the one way that Strangelove is sort of different in that, like,
And also perfect.
Strangelove is also perfect. But like Strangelove is coming from the perspective from a culture that created the atomic bomb, that is responsible for the atomic bomb, whereas, you know, Akira is being made by
and does so with the glibness of a culture that did create it.
Yes, it does. Whereas Akira is coming from the perspective of the victims, and yet is also in some ways about the creation, which is sort of interesting.
Oh my god, the children.
Yeah, no, they're like, that's the children are a really good visual for what's going on, and I think that it ties into some of the spirituality stuff that you're going to touch on later, I think.
But I mean, I think they touch really well in with, like, we partially caused this. This is partially our fault. Anxieties of the atomic bomb as well. Like, most countries around that time were, like, developing something akin to it or, like, working on it. I could be talking my ass. I don't genuinely know if this applies to Japan here. I do need to preface that right now. But I mean, like, I feel like this idea ties in with the ethos really well, especially because they're talking about Tetsuo, the atomic bomb of the movie, and, like, the children are like, we are partially to blame for his actions. We brought this on ourselves. We need to rectify this, and we need to get rid of it. Which, as I said, ties in with that atomic bomb ethos and anxiety.
Yeah, and because that's the thing, right? Is that, like, if you're talking about, you know, Japan as a culture's relationship with the atomic bomb, you really can't get around the fact that that's also really heavily tied into their relationship with fascism. And that's sort of what I was thinking about throughout most of the movie, that there are a lot of interesting parallels to both what I know about, like, pre-war, like, military dictatorship Japan, and also post-war economic bubble Japan, to even today, like, which is a little sad. Because, like, I think there is that sort of feeling, that feeling of responsibility, and yet also this kind of sympathy for Tetsuo, because, like, when you boil it down to it, and there are, again, I'm not an expert. I want to emphasize this before I go off on my little tear. I only know what I know.
Go watch the Bill Wirtz video.
So, like, I'm sure that in a couple of years, after I've, like, actually lived in Japan, I'm gonna listen to this again and, like, cringe so hard my spine's gonna, like, fold in, like, 10 different directions. But regardless, we're gonna take a stab at it, because the thing about fascism, generally speaking, all kinds of fascism, our OG Italian fascism, Germany Nazi fascism, modern day American fascism, and Japanese fascism, which is, there are some differences between that and, the European fascism that I'm not as familiar with, because we tend to gloss over, even in American history classes, what, like, Japan's culture was actually like. Like, we know a lot about what the Third Reich was actually like. We're taught that in schools. Not so much in Japan. We basically know Pearl Harbor, they did some war crimes, and then we dropped the bombs. And that's about the extent that Japan gets talked about in American history classes. So, the details and how it meaningfully differed from European fascism, I'm not as familiar with. But I'm, based on what I do know, both from, just prior knowledge and a little bit of research, is that kind of the core of fascism on both a macro and an individual level is emasculation. That there's a reason that all the fascies these days in America like the word cuck so much. And that this goes along with Tetsuo's character perfectly, right? And that, like, I'm a little weak little beta, like, that's my character. And the minute I'm given power, I'm gonna, exact revenge and, like, show everyone what a big dick I got, basically. And
And he's got the biggest dick by the end here. Granted, it's probably infused with some technology and some weird skin stuff going on. Well, he's got multiple fingers, right? Like on one finger. Are we talking about this right now? Are we talking about Tetsuo's weird dick?
Tetsuo absolutely has an echidna dick. He's got several
Hell yeah. We are sorry for the previous 30 seconds of podcast.
I'm not. But that is also a feeling that drives fascism on a macro level. And like particularly like this is why, Make America Great Again, for example. Hitler had his own version of that, and like Japanese fascism too recalled a, perceived previous glory day of what Japanese culture was like, and like tried to reclaim that.
High recommendation. Cody Johnson has a YouTube channel called Some More News, where he did a big detailed exploration of what fascism is and like where we're at in fascism in the United States and the warning signs of fascism that I highly recommend checking out. He is very darkly funny, so like it won't just be sad all the way through. You'll probably cry laugh at least once or twice. Some
nice gallows humor.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that's kind of the key to fascism, both emasculation on a micro and a macro level. And sort of the interesting thing about this movie and the scary thing is how that rhetoric of like, leading up to the atomic bomb and like the post-war like stuff, how that how Tetsuo's character and a lot of the sentiments from like the Colonel and a bunch of the other characters, how that echoes this sort of fascism and how it's not just pre or post war. There's a little bit of this baked in, because that's something else that's sort of an ongoing thing in the movie that the characters often talk about, is that like, Neo Tokyo is this wretched hive of scum and villainy, and that it's got no principles, it's got no culture, it's just a den of sin and hedonism and capitalism like any other cyberpunk city. And that idea very much reflects the notion that a lot of nationalist groups in Japan sort of have right now, that, they, once again, that their culture has been like cucked. That's why the ruling party is trying so hard to get them remilitarized. Like, there's that call to, go back to the glory days. And this also applies to pre-military dictatorship Japan, when like they were kind of a new player on the broader like world stage that they felt like people didn't take seriously, and they had their racist dreams of like of controlling all of Asia, and that's sort of the cultural fear that gets tapped into, that fascists like to exploit, because like there is maybe like something to be said, like especially if you don't address this shit in your education system, there is like, maybe this genuine feeling of purposelessness that sort of goes on when you have people getting ground up in a capitalist machine, doing stuff that they don't really believe in or care about. Like a lot of old principles and stuff go out the window. Like that can be an accurate observation about the state of your society and your culture. And it's that observation that fascists like to say, hey, fascism is the answer, when it's not, because fascism fucking sucks.
Maybe the problem is capitalism. Oh. I don't know if anybody's ever said that before. I feel like we might be breaking new ground here.
Yeah. Sean, I think we gotta go Frankenstein Che Guevara back together. I think we done it. I think we've rediscovered socialism.
Fascism sucks. I just needed to jump in there and agree with Jackson. Fuck fascists. Continue.
Yeah, no, because I don't like. Please understand that it might sound like I'm running some apologia by saying like, hey, there are some observations about a culture that maybe are accurate descriptions, but that does not mean the solution to them is fascism. And because that's the real scary thing, is how, and I think what makes the movie like effective on this allegorical level is that it is sort of cyclical, like not saying I don't know enough about Japan's like current political situation now to like I'm not going to sit here and say that they're becoming fascist in the way that we are. They might be, I don't know, but I do know that like at the very least right-wing nationalism is kind of the current ruling party's goal. Like Abe and Suga and all those guys, they really, really want the JSDF to be an actual military, and that's sort of the first step in, again, like we got cucked by other countries, we want to reclaim our own power, and we should have addressed this shit.
I didn't even pick up on the cycles, but that you're talking about, like in the movie of like destruction, rebirth, destruction, rebirth, destruction, rebirth. Like that's really fascinating, especially with like the cycles of fascism in that regard.
Yeah, because I think it is really tied into, like, in a weird way, I think it is tied into the religious stuff in the movie too, and that like there is like sort of a comparison, and that like it doesn't have to be that way necessarily. Like I think the ending of the movie is genuinely like pretty hopeful, but I think it's also a pretty biting critique of the ways that Japanese culture did and did not move away from, you know, what sort of caused the, you know, the ultimate downfall of its like Axis era government. And I think that's basically, I think, what the movie is kind of getting at, and that like, hey guys, the last time we started to like drift into this like nationalistic, like ultra right-wing fascist thinking, we went up in a fucking fiery inferno. Let's get our shit together and not do that again, please. We have a chance still.
Dark, but what Akira is about, yes.
It is dark, and the one thing, like the one caveat is, again, like I might be misreading the movie, because the one thing that does complicate it is, well, I don't know like Japan's sort of, as you said earlier, I don't know Japan's own history with like to what degree they were chasing after like nuclear power. I mean, I'm sure they were like, you know, doing their best to develop like the most fucked up weapons like everyone was back then, but like I don't know exactly like how far along in that process they were, how much of a concern that was of like their Axis era government. So like that, it is important to remember that like this is coming from a nation of people scarred, victimized by nuclear power, even if the whole thing is complicated. It's not. I'm basically not trying to say like, oh, you know, because of a fascist government, you know, that dropping the bomb was good. It was a horrible atrocity. It's like, that's not what I'm trying to say here. And that's something that should be remembered when looking at this movie, and that we are talking from like the culture that's a victim of the nuclear bomb. And that feeling of like, from internally, someone saying, hey, I'm Japanese and looking at my own country's history, I you know, think that we kind of brought about our own downfall with that fucking fascism shit. That comes across very differently from like me, an American, going, America, fuck yeah, we won. Like I'm worried that's how it comes across. So I would like to make that nuance clear that is not what I'm saying.
Jackson, are you saying that there is nuance within this movie as well as within real life? Because you know we're in a post-nuance world here, all right? What you're saying, what you have said is, fuck yeah, America first, let's go, row. And there's no room for any sort of other interpretation there.
I'm not gonna lie. If I'm hedging even more than usual, I feel like even talking about this stuff because I'm about to move to Japan, like I feel like I'm gonna make friends, and like they're gonna be like, oh, what do you do for fun? Oh, I run this podcast, and like, you know, you should go listen to it. We talk about movies, and my Japanese friends are gonna listen to it and think my takes are like horrible and insensitive. So,
I mean, it is always rough too, because like a lot of the movies that we talk about on this podcast are very much Euro-American centric, and like we're very much in the wheelhouse to talk about movies like that. But like occasionally we do try and throw in foreign movies in some capacity. A lot of them are Japanese just because of Jackson's predilections. I'm not gonna beat around the bush here.
I mean, I'm willing to shoulder that burden. I'll take that.
So when we get into those situations, we generally try and look at movies from like an American perspective and acknowledge that we are doing so, but like more so look at it from a global perspective. Like, okay, this reading would apply to everyone throughout the world. Akira is not a movie that you can really do that with, just because it is so hyper centralized on Japan, which is not a bad thing to the movie's credit at all. Like, I am not saying like, oh, you should never hyper centralize your movie to a demographic. That's how some really great movies get made, especially because sometimes it's important to have a movie centralized to a demographic, to be like, hey, maybe think about why fascism sucks in some capacity. Then, you know, here's a movie, it's got Iron Man going pew pew with his laser beam. And
Iron Man, go boom.
But yeah, I mean, I guess this leads us to the last little bit, which isn't necessarily as thematically relevant or anything, but I just think is kind of an interesting idea and an interesting exploration on like how people perceive life and death and God and being in general, which is something that I have thought a lot about myself. If this is, I'm going to talk a little bit, I guess, about my faith for a second here, just because I kind of have a weird faith, I think, in that I consider myself to be an apathist, which is a word I saw maybe once and it really, really stuck with me, which is to say that I am not like agnostic. I'm not an atheist. I just generally don't really care if there is an afterlife or not. I think that is not something that like I can really do anything with. And my personal belief is that if there is a God, he or she or they would not care whether or not we believed in them, because if they cared about that, they would not be a kind and just God, and therefore is not a God I want to care about. So
Jesse Eisenberg, Superman.
What?
Sorry. That was like that was one of the lines from Batman versus Superman when Jesse Eisenberg is like, if he's all powerful, then he's not all good, Superman.
Oh, I mean, basically, yeah, though, is the thing.
I mean, just ignore me. I'm just fucking shit posting.
No, that's fine. You're more than welcome
You're making a real point. Keep going.
But I mean, so like with that in mind, like I think that's a fairly, you know, decent way of looking at the world. Just do good and hope for the best is basically what my life boils down to. And I think like because of that, it lets me kind of think a lot more about like what exactly everything entails, and like the idea, and kind of exploring some more out there theories about the universe with a little bit of a more open mind, just because I'm like, I don't know, any of these could be true. We don't know what fucking happens when you die. Fuck, this could be the case. So like, I think this movie does a really interesting way of presenting, like, you know, we are all parts of God because God created us in our own way by accident, and explosions happen and atoms are universes, and we, because of parts, the basic theology of it is something I've seen before, actually, in that like every atom in and of itself is its own universe. Like once you get down to a small enough level, basically an atom becomes a universe. Like we can't see that far down. So like we are an atom. We are a universe in an atom of another universe, and so forth and so forth and so forth. Very Men in Black in the Locker situation, if you want a little bit more of a ground to earth reference. Ground to earth? What the fuck is wrong with me? What you don't know is I have just cut out 3 minutes of me as I can't say a word. Oh boy, howdy. So I think this is a very interesting theory, and like I like the idea as well that like we are like the genetic memory, like we have the memory of the Big Bang, of the gods inside us, and so like the power occasionally awakens inside us, and like we're shown to have exorbitant power, and that I don't necessarily believe in that side of things. I think it's a cool theory. I think the atom universe theory is far more realistic and believable because I've never seen anyone Akira themselves. But this idea of Tetsuo and Akira representing destruction and Tetsuo representing creation, just given how they treated the world, and that Akira only blew stuff up, and Tetsuo basically continued to create and morph, and like his own growth is a form of creation, and like that kind of combination creates its own new universe in and of itself, because every universe is created through creation and destruction, and forms its own little atom that belongs in each one of us. So we are all gods of our own universes. Our own universes are tiny and inside of us. Do we pray to ourselves? I don't know. I don't really have like some great theme or thesis about this, and I know I'm kind of meandering in my own weird way, but I just think it's interesting. I just sometimes like talking about weird theologies, because I think theology in and of itself is incredibly interesting, and generally like thinking about like, what if each atom is a universe and we're all constructed of quadrillions of little universes, and each one has little people in it doing their own little people things. I don't know. I sound like a crazy person now, and I'm sorry about that.
I mean, I've been interested, because these are the sorts of things that I tend not to think about, because I am the most like Reddit atheist in the entire world, like tipping my fucking fedora at everyone. So the spiritual aspect of things tends to skirt me by. I do think what you're saying is interesting and relevant, though, especially I'm even less confident about my knowledge of like Shinto and Japanese theology than I am of my knowledge of Japanese history and fascism, so I won't go too much into that.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely staying somewhat away from that. I'm going to kind of jump off. I think I know what you're about to say. If you don't mind, I'm going to kind of
please, by all means,
steal that a little bit, because Japan, again, super generic here. I'm probably generalizing, and I'm probably wrong in a lot of ways. But I know that Shintoism does involve revering like emperors as chosen by God, much in the same way that Europe revered kings.
Descended by God, actually.
Descended, even more so. And so, I mean, that even further plays into the ideas of Akira, whereby there is God inside all of us in our genetic memories and whatnot.
Yeah.
Again, more Japan stuff that I don't know, because I stupid brain and only know media. My brain is media, and that is it.
I mostly only know media. I do know I went to Tokyo for 1 week. So for that one beautiful week, I knew about something that wasn't media. And this is how I know that in Shinto, there are shrines dedicated to like real people who have become like deified, because I went to a few of them and like read a little bit about them and their lives and stuff and what they come to represent. So yeah, no, that's definitely a thing. And
what's it like outside the Midwest?
Happier, I would hope.
Wow. What's that feel like?
I don't think anyone knows what that feels like anymore. But I guess one last thing about like sort of related to like Akira and the symbolism there, and that I think that also plays in really well. Because one thing that I didn't talk about in our pre-discussion that I was reminded of when you brought up the spirituality stuff is that I think that like with this idea of cycles and creation and destruction, I was actually reminded of Tokyo Story quite a bit.
I knew that was going to be a movie that we come back to. I knew it.
Yep, always has been. But part of Tokyo Story is, very obviously focused on this, generational anxiety, let's say, and how like that's a, more down to earth, like human drama. So it manifests differently, of course. But I feel like, earlier with you saying like the wrinkly children, who have been all Akira'd, and they're like we feel kind of responsible for Tetsuo. I think that's really interesting, and that like, these are the products of the original experiments, and you could see like, these are the generation of post-war Japan who like grew up and were kind of fucked up by like, the history and all that of the atomic bomb, and feel a sense of responsibility for creating Tetsuo, who did not have that experience of like, being directly necessarily impacted by, the bomb and that experimentation in this allegory, but is sort of getting that secondhand, like handed down from the generation that was scarred from that. And this idea that like now that we're going to like, the cycle's kind of repeated. Hopefully, like you, like Kaneda and the rest of the crew who's still alive, like maybe in the ruins of this horrible world, like maybe you can do better than we did. I feel like that's a very common theme in general, like in storytelling.
Nier Automata. Oh,
yeah, that's Nier Automata. That's Metal Gear Solid. That's that's a lot. That's Star Wars. That's a lot of things. But I was about to say, I feel like
it's actually also not Train to Busan, Snowpiercer. It has a very similar message at the end there that I just as an aside, a lot of people find really depressing. And like I've argued with many people like, oh, Snowpiercer is so nihilistic. And I'm like, you're fucking wrong. It is so goddamn hopeful. Sorry, continue.
I need to watch Snowpiercer.
You do. I love that movie.
That's Bong Joon-ho, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe we should do that for my second movie instead.
Oh, I'm down for that. Yeah.
We'll talk about Snowpiercer next month.
Fuck yeah. But yeah, so I mean, there's definitely some like, I think that ties in a little bit, at least along that thread with some of the more like spiritual God stuff and how that sort of ties back in and relates. There's a lot going on in this movie. Like it is really interesting to sort of think about and pick apart. But again, a lot of it is kind of trying to fill in the blanks, being not Japanese and having not been raised Japanese, and nor can I reasonably claim to be like any sort of expert in Japanese history or anything like that. So we're doing guesswork here, but I mean I think that it's interesting to think about.
Summary of the podcast for anyone who missed it: we don't know what the fuck we're talking about, but we talked for an hour anyway.
Maybe it gets someone who does know something to think about why we're wrong and tell us why we're wrong.
Actually, we talked for 55 minutes when we didn't know anything. I do know that if you put your movie online with commercials, you're asking for it to be pirated.
True. All right, we may have looked like fools, but we weren't wrong on at least one thing.
No, fools all the way. I've been Sean McKinda, your foolish host. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. That's about it right now.
And I've been Jackson Keller, your foolish fool with no foolish online presence.
That's the least foolish thing you can do, though.
Maybe this actually makes me like the big brain, like wise Chad. I don't know.
I think it does. You can reach out to the podcast, though, at BADH_cast on Twitter. We mostly tweet out updates on like episodes, if they're getting delayed, if there's a new bonus episode, anything like that, which there should be a new bonus episode coming out within like 2 or 3 days from this episode. So, keep that in mind. If you want to get access to that bonus episode, patreon.com/BADHcast. We're only down months to our Discord where you can come yell at Jackson and I directly and tell us how wrong we were about Akira. $5 months gets you extra our Discord, as well as our backlog of bonus episodes and any new bonus episodes as they come out. $10 a month gets you access to everything else before and the ability to request bonus episodes. If you wanted to talk about a specific movie, that's the place to do it. It also gives a little something.
Thank you very much, Julia, Travis, Pat, Mom, Aunt Summer. Y'all are great. Go team.
Absolutely wonderful. Also, thanks to Loads of High with our theme song. It is Suicide Alternate Take off the album High Octane Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out wherever you can. Stream their music, buy their music, whatever you got to do. Please support artists, theaters, performers, anybody who does stuff right now that's shut down because of COVID. You got to support them. So please buy music, support local theaters, whatever you can do to support people, please do so. Also, thanks to 25yearslatersite.com. There's a little button of us in the corner that you can go and click on. But you should also check out what other people are writing over there. There's a bunch of really talented people doing a bunch of really talented writing that you should absolutely check out. Next week, we're going to be talking about Kubo and the Two Strings, which is to say we're going to continue our exploration through Japan. However, this is a Japanese set movie, or at least Japanese inspired movie, with almost an entirely, white cast, and also made by a American company. There's some problematic elements in that regard, but still a great movie, I promise.
For some reason, I thought Laika was European. Why?
It might be European. I don't know.
Okay.
It's not Japan. Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go